perhaps you'd like to start with whether there were any aspects of your upbringing or family that pointed you towards this career.
I come from a military family. I think perfect training for making films, I have to say. I do remember a couple of rather scary, I was thinking about it recently actually, and it is a little bit like a psychoanalytic answer, I have to say. But recently I was thinking that I have two childhood memories that might have tricked my interest. One was being a soldier's daughter. I remember standing on parade grounds and realizing that something different happened when soldiers, strutted up and down. And then on the grass outside the parade ground, it was kind of ordinary. But the second you trod on that space, you were different. You were allowed to wear funny clothes and shout. But more in terms of, I was aware very early that I was not a theatrical actor. I mean, I say early, I mean as a child, I was aware that all the things that are supposed to go along with being a performer, like being a show-off and being incredibly confident in public and liking going to parties. I mean, really, when I was about 7, I was already aware that I liked performing in private, but maybe with one brother, not more, because then it becomes like a group. But I was aware that the theatre was never going to really be the place I wanted to be.
How did you conquer, your you presumed your fear? I mean, what was the moment you felt you could?
Well, I actually haven't, to be honest.
Right.
I haven't. But the other memory I have maybe pointed away for me, and it was before I ever thought it was possible to make films, even though of course I knew about the cinema and I loved watching films. When I was a little older, when I was about 11, going to school, boarding school on a train, I remember sitting in a carriage, knowing how miserable I was, and also at the same time knowing that no one in the carriage would be able to tell, because I was doing such a good job of looking completely normal. And I realize, I look at this now and I say, that is a cinematic fantasy. That is completely advanced filmmaking. That you're talking there about a kind of the fantasy, the acknowledgement that keeps me interested in cinema performance, which is that you can never ever know what someone else is really thinking, and what they're going to tell you or what they're going to show you may not be everything. There's always a reason to go on looking.
I feel like we're almost jumping straight in, but I think we should talk about, perhaps the most important early formative figure for you, who is Derek Jarman, because I believe he is the person who first got you involved in film. Is that right?
He is really the reason that I'm here, because why I'm in a cinema context at all, and he is exactly the right place to start, because before him, I was etc. school plays, going to university, performing in plays, but I was a writer at university. I was always going to be a writer, and I didn't take it that seriously, and I still don't really take it seriously that I'm a performer. But Derek was the first filmmaker that I met.
So how did he find you?
Very orthodox. He was casting a film called Caravaggio. And I went to see him in a completely, go and see him for a part way. And we just hit it off.
And were the early Jarman films a kind of boot camp for you, a kind of way of discovering cinema acting?
Boot camp. He also, of course, was a forces child. He made filmmakers of all of us. That was one thing I can say. And I don't mean that he necessarily made directors of us, but we worked as a group. He was a great one for putting together a group of people and then basically requiring that you all just got on with it, under his eye, of course, but it was a very, very collaborative experience. I mean, the Caravaggio, which was the first film I made with him, and for those of you who haven't seen it, there are really very precise setups in the film that are modeled very closely to the paintings, Caravaggio's paintings. I remember grips and sparks telling Derek that maybe the lighting wasn't quite right in a way that I've never seen since, and he was always, we all made the films together. And there were a group of us who worked with him pretty endlessly. And I worked with him for 7 films until he died 9 years after we made Caravaggio.
One of the things that strikes me, I mean, I've been cramming your films for the last few days, and it strikes me that you had a lot of opportunity in your early films to act in many scenes where the dialogue was quite sparse. And that's a rare opportunity that for a British actor to get, because so much British, television, theatre, and even film acting involves huge reams of dialogue scenes.
Derek, as a painter, as a visual artist, first and foremost, and was always the first to say that he couldn't really write scripts. Apart from anything else, the dialogue's pretty ropey constantly in Derek Jarman's films. Who cares? The pictures are beyond, and there's something so much more than people being articulate in that literary way. And apart from anything else, several of the films that I made with Derek Jarman are completely silent. And Derek, there were sort of haute couture and pret-a-porter films. I don't know, you'd have to decide which for you was which with Derek. There was the 35mm films, which we would make once every, 2 or 3 years. There was Caravaggio, The War Requiem, Edward II, and Wittgenstein. And then in between, we would make these experimental films, the first of which, the first feature film was The Last of England, and then there was The Garden. But there were these other experimental films like Imagining October, which was Super 8 blown up to 35mm, which of course are completely silent. And so the performance element, which by the way you could never call acting, because it really is like a documentary film of our lives, it's a dress up really, nothing more sophisticated than my 10-year-old twins do. They were completely silent films, so the performance element was always about being unwatched and being filmed being unwatched.
Can you imagine ever having a relationship like that with another film director?
I can, because if I said I couldn't, then that would just be too depressing for words. I mean, I can't imagine having a relationship exactly like that, because, relationships are unique, and we had a very unique friendship. But one of the great blessings for me of recent years, since he died, because when he died, it was a bit of a shock for me. I mean, not a shock because we kind of knew he was dying, but here's the thing: when he died, lots of things died, kind of coincidentally. There was a moment of culturally that really ended at that moment, and there was a political shift, and there was a whole way of making films that was really impossible for us after that. The BFI production arm was disbanded, and the lottery, there was time before the moment when films were funded through the lottery system. The UK Film Council didn't exist. Or the whole way of putting films together in this country changed radically. And I have to say, I find it very strange, because I live really in an alien situation now, because I live in the far north of Scotland. I have 10-year-old twins, and when they were born, I went to live in the far north of Scotland, and I really have almost nothing to do with London anymore. So my access to the filmmaking in London, in particular, is really cauterized. I don't really know. You'd have to tell me what's going on. I come here probably less than anywhere. And I'm sad about that, because, I'm sad that way of making films has well, let's say, optimistically it'll rise again, but it's become very difficult.
But I just wanted to mention the one thing from that era, which slightly after the Jarman films, which kind of iconicized you in a way as the kind of the queen of the avant-garde, and that was the performance art piece.
This was a piece called The Maybe, which I developed for a couple of years, and I made it first in the Serpentine in London, and I invited Cornelia Parker to work with me on the installation there, and then I also made it the following year in Rome, where I worked with the French artist Pierre et Gilles. They made a portrait for it, and it was an installation, a live art installation in which I lay in a glass case for 8 hours a day for 7 days. I wanted to find a gesture that was a kind of hybrid between what I love most about live performance, which is everybody in the same room, seeing all of you, and anything may happen. This is over 10 years ago. This is you probably know. It's probably written down there. 1990, before my children were born, 1995.
I think. I mean, the two films from that era, Loves the Devil was one where you played Muriel Belcher.
Where I was pregnant. My children were, in fact, Muriel Belcher's alcoholic paunch.
Fantastic. And the other one is The War Zone, which I think is the first time you play a mum, is it?
It probably was, and I was... there are no prosthetics in that film. That's what people look like when they've just had twins, like a month earlier.
And a very interesting husband-wife scenario. You and Ray Winston. I found that hard to imagine before I saw it.
Not so hard. No, I'd go there. I'd go there. I'd happily marry Ray Winston if he's asking.
Very good.
No, that was a very interesting film. I was completely sort of doped up on hormones at that time. I was breastfeeding twins and had just had them, so I can barely remember anything about it.
At this point, we sort of come to the sort of phase of your career when you begin to make films that are, you know, more widely popular, let's say, in the broadest possible terms, like, you know, you star in The Beach, and but you're also making American independent film, The Deep End.
Actually, I think what happened is, you know, Derek died, I had these children, I was living in the north of Scotland. The way in which films that I wanted to make and that I was wanting to develop with my friends looked like it was, temporarily at least, closed to us. I just told myself to look for other alliances. And one thing that I really learned from Derek and from all of us in that group was that our alliances were always international. Derek Jarman's films were always funded by ZDF and Takashi Asai's Uplink in Japan and Mikado in Italy and the BFI. They were never really British films in that sense. And so it just always occurred to me to think of myself as an international artist. And when I started to meet American independent filmmakers, it just felt like home. It felt much more familiar to me than the kind of industrial filmmaking that I saw happening here. And so I went to work with David Siegel and Scott McGeehee, who put together a film that I made with them called The Deep End. They put it together in a completely ad hoc way. They asked their parents' friends for money, and they just put together 1,000 here and 5,000 there, and that was so familiar to me. That's just the way that we always used to work. I've always said, and I still believe it, that the one advantage of advanced capitalism in America is that filmmakers know that they're not dependent on anybody, and they just get, as they used to say, on their bike and do it, and they just raise the money and credit cards, etc.
So what was it like suddenly working in the States with American actors and in an American accent? And
it was quite exotic, actually. It was that was the first. It was so naturalistic, you know. They're very classical, David Siegel and Scott McGeehee, and they wanted to make this film as a kind of, you know, modern film noir at a time when it became a bit fashionable just after that, but they were really the first people who had this idea. That film was based on a novel called The Blank Wall, which Max Offels had made a film called The Reckless Moment,
yes.
Beautiful film with James Mason. And so it wasn't exactly a remake, but it was a film with a very kind of classical film noir genealogy. And so there was that I could sort of rely on, their kind of classicism. But beyond that, you know, the sort of landscape of the film is very naturalistic, the sort of calibration of it. And so in performance terms, it was really a first for me. And it was really interesting because apart from anything else, the character that I play this mother who's, very, like the only film that my parents have ever liked that I've never made. And I think they don't even notice that, you know, she's a naval service wife, you know, sort of, and she sort of wears nice clothes and she does the right thing. And she doesn't show what she feels, you know. They really like it. And there's no sex either. And there are none of the gays or any of that. I didn't say that, but you know, anyway. But it's got that sort of naturalistic feel. And in terms of performance, it required that very, you know, not intellectual. It's not an intellectual performance, and that's the first really not stylized performance I think that I had an opportunity to work with, and I really enjoyed it, and I've worked with more since. But they're great, David and Scott. They're very, very fine filmmakers.
I want to talk briefly about Young Adam, because that was kind of a moment when you came back to working in Britain, or Scotland.
Scotland.
Scotland. And to making, you know, something that is in the sort of Scottish indie scene. And some strong words were said around that at the time.
Were there? Who? Me?
I think you did.
No, really? What did I say?
I don't know. I think you said all sorts of pronouncements. But
Did
I think others did too. I don't think you were alone.
I said, and I still say, it's a Scottish film, and the reason I said that is because the first people, again back to the point, the first people who, and the only people for a very long time who supported David Mackenzie in trying to get this film made, were the Glasgow Film Fund and the Scottish Film Council, and the UK Film Council said no, time and time again. And it is true that eventually they said yes and gave that much. And it is true that that much at the end is a very important bit. I mean, it's a really important bit, and it's good, it's great, thank you very much. But at the same time, it really felt to me like I didn't want that film to be identified and to claim, I wanted it to be a celebration for Scotland, of the kind of filmmaking that's possible in Scotland.
Another thing that comes out of it is that you were playing a fairly downtrodden person in some ways in that film. And one of the things that I think that marks you out as an actor of the female gender is that you're not too worried about the maintenance of the image of your beauty. Have you anything to say to that?
Oh, God. Bleh. I don't know what to say to that. You know, it's all just, you know, dressing up and making faces, I think. And I don't know what to say to that.
Okay.
I thought I was kind of beautiful in Young Adam, to be honest with you, really.
You were, but I'm just, I mean, it's a, you know.
Shiny, but beautiful. Dirty, but beautiful.
I can't deny it.
Filthy, but beautiful.
But to change, just to complete contrast to Young Adam, let's think about the Chronicles of Narnia, shall we? Here you have incarnating a powerful figure from the childhood memories of probably most of the people in this room. I mean, some, you know, a subject of some weight to take on in that sense.
Yeah, but although happily not me, because I'm in a minority, I think, of
never
one.
read them?
No, I was not. I was an infidel. No, I was not subjected to them when I was a child, and I really hadn't read them. I mean, I've only read a couple of them now. My children have read more than I. And when Andrew Adamson first talked to me about it, I hadn't read them at all, which was quite good.
Because how did you come to be cast for that?
He wanted me to do it. I mean, you know, it wasn't my idea. It was Andrew Adamson just had this bugbear that he wanted me to do it, and he wouldn't go away. And so, and I really, really liked him. He was such a dude, and I would have made that film with him, really, if he had made it in a garage. I went to see him, and he just talked such a good picture. And because I didn't know the book, I had nothing to compare it. I just went, that's a film I want to see, and you want me to help you make it? I'm in. And you want to go to New Zealand to do it? Sweet, you know. It was fantastic.
Were you at all worried, I don't suppose you were, but were you at all worried about being typecast as a villain from that point onwards?
No. No, not at all. Should I be? No.
How many villains have you played since?
Well, they're all villains, aren't they? Let's face it, and they're all deeply good.
One of the things I've really enjoyed in your sort of latter-day career is some of the brief cameos you've had. I mean, we're not going to show them, but I mean, you know, loved The Angel Gabriel and Constantine, which must have been huge fun to do.
Great fun.
And a little bit of echoes of Jarman in the middle of this
Completely.
weird
Completely.
CGI
But don't you
movie.
think the Narnia film's a bit like a big Jarman film?
Maybe, I'm not sure. I saw that one on a plane.
Totally.
I'm sorry, I haven't seen it
Well,
properly.
one of the reasons that I was attracted to doing the Narnia films in the first place was because Derek always used to tell me about an experience of standing on a subway or a bus in New York with standing next door to this little old lady and being struck to the heart with terror in his 40s and not understanding why. And then it was only when she got off the bus and she was walking along, he looked out the window and he saw her profile, and it was that woman who played the Wicked Witch of the West in the Wizard of Oz, which was his favourite film. And I know he was, when I was asked to do this, I know he was saying, do it for me. As he is a great one for iconic witches.
And I totally love your biker chick in Broken Flowers.
Ah,
A
wow.
real shock. You know,
It's
the
nothing.
door opens and you're there. And you're
There's
kind of-
nothing like a cheap wig when you need it.
Absolutely. But I mean, one of the things that you become more involved in American cinema over time, and there's a film which you are an executive producer of, Stephanie Daly.
Stephanie Daly was a film that that came to me. The director, Hilary Brucker, was a young woman who brought an idea to me. It was in a rough form, an idea about material that I felt I'd never seen before, which was about a young woman who is 15 and is an American woman who discovers she's pregnant. Well, no, she doesn't discover she's pregnant. She's in denial about the fact that she's pregnant, and she has a baby, and the baby dies, and she's had up for its murder. And I play a forensic psychologist who's trying to work out whether she knew she was pregnant or not. And I just found it such an interesting subject, particularly since the forensic psychologist is actually pregnant herself and desperate to keep the child. And there was this idea of this relationship between these two women that I was very drawn to. And so I wanted to do whatever I could to help her to make the film about this material. And she said, as sometimes people do, that they think the best way for me to help is to be in it. I didn't particularly agree with her, but I was in it because I wanted to help her make the film. But that film was the first film where it felt to the people I work with and I that it makes sense for my name to be on a film as executive producer, because when you've made as many independent films as I have that are so, such low budget, that then are seen to make a profit, then apparently it means something to have your name on the film as a producer. So supporting films from the seeding stage has always been what I've done, but I haven't always had my name on the film as a producer. But I've started to do that now because it seems to be the way things work, that it helps.